There are two versions of financial knowledge. The first version is everywhere. It is on YouTube, in best-selling books, in podcast episodes with millions of downloads. Budget carefully, invest consistently, buy index funds. Let compound interest work, avoid lifestyle inflation, retire early if you can. This version is real, it is useful, it has genuinely improved the financial lives of a large number of people who followed it seriously. The second version is not on YouTube. It is not in the books they sell you. It is not in the podcast episodes with millions of downloads. It exists in a different kind of room, in law firm conference tables in the West Loop, in family office meetings with no signage on the door, in conversations between people who have already accumulated enough that the question is no longer how to build wealth, but how to ensure it never diminishes. This video is about the second version, not because the first version is wrong, because the first version stops at the entrance to a building most financial content never enters. And the gap between what gets taught at the entrance and what gets practiced inside that building is not incremental. It is structural. It is generational. And understanding it changes the way you see every financial decision you will ever make. Here is what they don't sell you. Part 1. The most expensive financial decision most high-income people make, and it isn't a bad investment. Every financial education you have ever received is built on an implicit assumption. The assumption is that the goal of building wealth is eventually to realize it. You accumulate, the assets appreciate, and at some point you sell. You convert the appreciated asset into cash, you pay the tax, you have the money. This assumption is so embedded in how we think about wealth that most people never examine it. It feels like the definition of how it works. It is not how the very wealthy do it. And the reason they do it differently is not philosophical. It is mathematical. Here is the calculation. A family holds a position worth $310 million. Their cost basis is $30 million. Unrealized gain, $280 million. The position is fully valued. The rational move, by every conventional financial framework, is to sell, pay the tax, and redeploy. Federal capital gains, 20%. Net investment income tax, 3.8%. State tax, approximately 5% depending on jurisdiction. Total tax rate, approximately 29%. On $280 million in unrealized gains, a sale means roughly $81 million in taxes. Permanently. Not deferred, not recoverable, gone. The alternative, borrow against the position at 3.4% annually. A $190 million lending facility secured by the asset. No sale, no tax event. Full liquidity, borrowed into existence. Now run both scenarios forward 30 years with an identical 8% annual return assumption. Scenario 1. Sell, pay the tax, reinvest $229 million at 8%. Scenario 2. Retain the position, borrow liquidity, let $310 million compound at 8%. The gap after 30 years? $340 million. Not from a better investment. The return assumption is identical in both scenarios. The entire difference comes from one decision: what the family refused to pay. This is not a strategy for people with $310 million only. It is a principle. The wealthiest families in the world do not primarily think about return on investment. They think about what they are refusing to give up. Every sale is a permanent subtraction. Every tax payment is a permanent reduction in the compounding base. The architecture of serious wealth is built on refusing to trigger events that diminish it. The financial content you consume teaches you to optimize your investments. The version nobody sells you teaches you to refuse the subtraction. Part 2. The Asset Lattice. Why serious wealth is not a portfolio. Here is a mental model most financial education gives you. You have a portfolio. It contains assets. Each asset has a return. You diversify, you rebalance, you optimize the allocation. The portfolio is a collection of positions. This mental model is accurate for a certain level of wealth. It becomes a liability at another level. The families who build multi-generational wealth do not think in portfolios. They think in structures. And the difference between a portfolio and a structure is the difference between a stack and a lattice. A stack. Assets sitting on top of each other, each one independent. Remove one, the others are unaffected. A lattice. Assets that support each other structurally. Each one is not just generating its own return, it is serving as collateral for the next acquisition, generating cash flow that funds operations elsewhere, providing leverage utility that amplifies every surrounding position. Consider what this looks like in practice. A real estate holding generates $38 million annually in rental income, but that same real estate is also serving as collateral for a credit facility at 50% loan-to-value. That credit facility funded the acquisition of a stake in a private credit firm. The private credit firm generates carried interest, taxed at long-term capital gains rates, not ordinary income rates. The carried interest funds the next real estate acquisition, which generates more collateral, which secures more borrowing, which funds the next position. This is not a portfolio. It is a machine. Each component is chosen not only for its direct return, but for its tax character, its leverage utility, and its structural relationship to every other component. When a sophisticated family is presented with an offer to sell one component, say a water utility at 12 times EBITDA, they do not evaluate the offer on its merits in isolation. The patriarch's first question is not about the multiple. It is, what do we borrow against it today? Because selling the water utility does not merely remove the water utility's contribution, it removes the collateral it provides. It severs the income stream it generates. It eliminates the leverage it enables throughout the rest of the structure. The financial content you consume teaches you to diversify your portfolio. The version nobody sells you teaches you that serious wealth is not a portfolio. It is a structure, and the goal of every structural decision is to add a node that strengthens every surrounding node, never to remove one. Part 3. The tax event they never trigger, and the one the government never sees. There is a provision in the United States tax code that most financial content never discusses, not because it's illegal, not because it's obscure, because the people who benefit from it most have no incentive to broadcast it, and the people who teach financial literacy most broadly don't operate at the level where it matters. When an asset passes to heirs at death, the cost basis steps up to the fair market value at the date of death. The accumulated gain during the decedent's lifetime, however large, is permanently erased for tax purposes. A family purchased a real estate portfolio in 1987 for $18 million. It is worth $680 million today. The embedded gain, $662 million. The tax, if sold, approximately $190 million. If the family holds this asset until death and passes it to the next generation, that $662 million gain is eliminated. The heirs inherit at a cost basis of $680 million. The government never sees the appreciation, not deferred, eliminated. This is not a loophole. It is a feature of the tax code that has been present for decades. It is available to anyone. It requires only one thing: the discipline to not sell. The families who build wealth across generations understand this at a structural level. They are not holding assets because they are sentimental. They are holding assets because selling is mathematically the worst outcome for multi-decade compounding combined with a generational transfer strategy. Every year they hold, the unrealized gain compounds. Every year they hold, the step-up potential grows. The government's share diminishes with every passing year, not because of anything sophisticated, but because of one decision made and held across time. The financial content you consume teaches you to think in terms of your own investment horizon. The version nobody sells you teaches you to think across generations. Because the mathematics of wealth at that scale operate on a time frame most financial education doesn't address.
Part 4. Why the tax code isn't the same for everyone, and it's not because of loopholes.
Here is a fact that generates significant commentary but rarely gets explained with precision. A person who earns $500,000 in salary pays ordinary income tax on that salary. Federal rate at that income level, 37%. A person who earns $500,000 in carried interest, the profit share received by private equity and hedge fund managers on the gains they generate, pays long-term capital gains tax on that amount. Federal rate, 20%. Same dollar amount, different tax rate. The difference is not a loophole. It is a tax character distinction that was deliberately built into the code. Carried interest is classified as a return on investment rather than compensation for services because the people who structured private equity partnerships in the 1980s and 1990s designed the structure that way. And the tax treatment followed the structure.
This is the pattern across every sophisticated tax strategy available to serious wealth. The strategy does not evade the tax code. The strategy uses the tax code as designed. The tax code was designed by people who needed it to work a specific way for their structures to function. The structures came first. The tax treatment codified the structures. Understanding this changes how you see financial architecture. The question is not, how do I find the loophole? The loophole framing implies a code with one intended interpretation and a clever workaround. The actual situation is different. The code has multiple architectures built into it, one for earned income, one for investment income, one for carried interest, one for real estate depreciation, one for trust structures, one for entity classification. Each architecture has different tax character. The question serious wealth asks is, which architecture am I building in? Most people build in the earned income architecture by default, because that is what their economic life produces. The version of wealth nobody sells you is built in a different architecture from the beginning, one where income is generated through structures that produce the most favorable tax character, where gains compound in assets rather than flowing through as income, where the event that would trigger the highest tax rate is the event the architecture is specifically designed to never trigger. Why this version isn't sold to you? Financial content, courses, books, YouTube channels, podcast episodes, is a product. Products are sold to customers. Customers buy products when they believe the product will solve a problem they currently have. The first version of financial knowledge solves problems most people currently have. How to stop overspending, how to start investing, how to build a buffer, how to think about compound interest. These are real problems with real solutions, and the content that addresses them reaches a large and legitimate audience. The second version of financial knowledge does not solve problems you currently have. It describes an architecture you build toward, one that only becomes practically relevant at a scale most people haven't reached yet. It doesn't sell courses. It doesn't build subscriber bases. It doesn't solve a problem you can solve today with a purchase. There is a second reason. The second version, understood properly, reduces your consumption of financial products. A person who understands that the goal is to never trigger the sale event buys fewer financial products. A person who understands asset lattice structure stops thinking in individual investment picks. A person who understands step-up basis stops thinking about exit strategies. A person who understands tax character arbitrage stops optimizing within the architecture they're in and starts questioning the architecture entirely. The product disappears. The customer disappears with it. What remains is not a customer. It is an architect. Someone who is not buying a version of wealth. Someone who is building one. That is the version they don't sell you. Not because it's secret, because selling it ends the relationship.